Hi. Well, here we are again. Latest thing was we're going to ban meetings of more than 10 people, which kind of gets me out of those meetings, perhaps. I don't know. So that might be the silver lining of all of this. Um, in this particular uh, lecture, if you will, we're going to talk about that second part of chapter 7, which is producer surplus. And so without further ado, let me share my screen with you. And there it is. Oh darn! I guess I want to hit slideshow here. Oh, let me not do that yet. Uh, hold on, just 1 second. Sorry, thought I had it all ready to go, and of course I didn't. Slideshow from current slide. Okay, minimize this and share your screen. Now we're ready. Okay, so we are looking at the producer side of this equation, if you will, of trying to get to market efficiency. So first of all, what we want to make sure we understand is that cost is related to the supply curve. So when you see cost in microeconomics, what I want you to think of is what is the producer's cost. And that producer's cost is sort of how efficient that the producer is. Okay, so a producer is efficient if they have a low cost. And it's interesting that we see some of the terminology that we have used in the past in terms of, hey, let's see, let me spell it like this. Everything a seller must give up to produce a good. So that would be fixed cost, variable cost, and also opportunity cost. And it doesn't necessarily matter right now if you understand what fixed and variable are. We're going to go into that in a later chapter. But it really is the willingness to sell or supply to this market. And again, what we look at to determine a seller's cost is the supply curve, because the supply curve is a representation of a producer's cost. So to calculate producer surplus, what we're going to do is to take the price in the market and subtract the cost, aka the supply curve, to get producer surplus. Okay, so again, it is the price minus the cost or the willingness to sell in this particular example. So the willingness to sell, okay? And that is also our cost. Okay, cool. Let me clear these and go ahead and advance to the next slide. Here we have an example of some suppliers in a particular market. And we have Vincent, who is willing and able to do this particular, let me get to where I want to go. Okay, there we are. We have Vincent, whose cost is 900, 800 Claude, Pablo 600, Andy 500. Now, what we would say in terms of efficiency is that Andy is the most efficient producer here because he's able to produce at the lowest cost. So therefore, he is the most efficient, followed by Pablo, Claude, and Vincent. And again, what we're doing here is looking at a very small line segment under the supply curve. So let me go ahead and draw the supply curve, okay? And let's see if I can figure out a good way to do this. That would be a good way. We're looking at just this tiny section, which we are blowing up into, which we are blowing up into these suppliers. So just like we did with demand and we looked at just a few consumers, here we're looking at just a few producers to allow us to get a better understanding of each person's willingness to supply to that market or cost. Oh, whoop. Okay, so let me erase this. Okay, and let's go ahead and move forward. So very closely related to the supply curve, as I said, derived from the cost of the suppliers. And again, we're going to look at this in a marginal basis. Remember, for us, Marginal means the idea of one supplier, and then we'll put it together in the larger curve overall. Okay. All right, so here we have our suppliers from the previous slide. And just as we did, we want to kind of get an idea of what's going on in terms of each person's profitability, if you will. So because producer surplus is our cost minus the price. So again, in this case, we're going to put these people sort of in a straight line according to their efficiency. So that means Andy comes first because he's able to do this for $500. As the price goes up in the market, notice that we have more and more suppliers. And again, that's just the law of supply. As the price increases, the quantity supplied increases, all else held constant or other things equal. So as we look at this, and actually there's a typo in this particular one because, oops, sorry about that. Okay, there's a typo in this particular, I think I just screwed up here. There we go. Sure, okay. There's a typo in this particular slide. So yeah, like my life is not challenging enough. And that's right here, because this should say quantity supplied, not quantity demanded. So if that's confusing you, it just did me too. So supply, okay, not quantity demanded. Okay, so just like we saw previously when we look at these, we're going to kind of treat these as individual supplier rectangles, and we're going to say this is each person's producer surplus. And again, what the surplus actually will be is dependent on the price. So the next slides kind of show that, and so I'm going to kind of wait and show you on those particular slides. Okay. So again, supply curve is the seller's cost, and our producer surplus is the area up below the price but above supply. And again, remember that we're going to want to remember how to calculate the area of a triangle. And so to calculate the area of the triangle, just remember it is 1/2 the base times the height will equal our producer surplus. And that triangle will be the area that is below the price and above the supply curve. Okay, so here we have a very similar example like we had in the previous slide. And here we're going to start this example, and we're going to start first on pane A. So let me just kind of do this. Okay, so we're going to start here on pane A. The price, the price is $600, okay? And we have each of our suppliers' willingness to supply. Again, if that's a little confusing to you, remember if we just connect the tops of all of these, we kind of have a supply curve, don't we? So that's how we have looked at it so far in the course, but now we're breaking it down into each individual supplier. Okay, so if the price, and I'm just going to draw a line around price here, is $600, we see that only one supplier is willing and able to do that. And so if we wanted to calculate the producer surplus, we would essentially take the price minus the cost would give us our producer surplus. In this case, the price is $600 minus the cost. So our producer surplus is $100. Okay, so Andy's producer surplus is $100, and that's how we figured out this particular number right here. Okay, so what happens is when the price goes down, then producers will leave the market. When the price goes up, we're going to have additional suppliers come into the market. So the second pane, notice that the price is going up over here in panel B. And now the new price in the market is going to be $800. So again, this will be phrased a little bit differently than perhaps what we're used to seeing. But the first thing we want to do is to look at how did this price affect initial producers, meaning those people that were already producing in the market at a lower price. So the first thing that I want to look at here is, okay, so this was the $100 producer surplus that we initially had. We are now adding to Andy's producer surplus by this rectangle right here. So I'm going to go ahead and show you how to calculate that. How did we end up with Andy's producer surplus of 300? Again, we just took his price at the new price of, $800. And we're going to subtract his cost of $500. And so that leaves Andy with a $300 producer surplus. Part of that is attributable to the $100 producer surplus that he had from pane A. And when the price increased, he gained $200 producer surplus from pane B. And that's what gives us the 300. So this 300 would be the the increase in producer surplus to initial consumers. Okay, so the additional producer surplus to initial producers, I know, so many terms, would be 200. And Andy's sum of producer surplus would be the 300. Again, the terminology becomes a little bit difficult in these, so I wanted to make sure that you understand that. Also, we know that when the price increases, that new producers will enter into the market. So this would be producer surplus by new producers. So we're going to go ahead and look at that one. It's this box that I just drew here, Pablo's producer surplus. So first what I'm going to do is to say, okay, well, how did we get that? And so we got that by, we got that by taking the price in the market, which is 800, subtracting Pablo's cost, which is 200, and we end up with Pablo's, I'm sorry, 200 is not correct. I'm sorry, I looked at the wrong thing. 600, sorry, 600 is Pablo's cost, and that will mean that we have 200 of producer surplus. So this $200 would be in actuality the new producer surplus to new producers entering into the market. Now, again, I don't like the way these slides, and really your author says total producer surplus, because we're going to be studying something called total surplus. So I think it's a little bit confusing. And so what I want to say to you is, I think it's best to not think of this as total producer surplus. I really think it's best to think of this really, let's see if this will let me do that right there. Yeah, as the sum of producer surplus. I think it's a little less confusing because we get kind of caught up in terminology, particularly in this class. Okay, let me go ahead and clear these drawings and advance to the next slide. So what we saw on the previous slide is that as the price increases, producer surplus increases. And again, that's all else held constant. As the price decreases, producer surplus decreases. I'm not so hung up on if you remember that for the for the test. But those are some things just to kind of keep in mind as we look at this. I'm going to go ahead and erase that. Okay, so again, how do we look at this higher price? We look at it in two forms. We look at it in the first form of existing sellers, what was their increase in producer surplus, and new sellers that come into the market, what was their, how much producer surplus did they earn based upon their costs. Okay, so here, okay, sorry about that. Here we have it on a supply curve that we're used to seeing with many suppliers. So here we want to go ahead, and I'm going to start with panel A. I'm going to put in some prices here because I think that's just a little bit easier. Let's say 500 is the price. And let's say that down here quantity is 100. I want to keep things pretty simple in terms of our mathematics because nobody needs any more stress today. Okay, so what we want to do then for our price, our initial P1 of 500, our Q1, I'm sorry, P1 of 500, Q1 of 100, is we want to calculate the area of this pink, thank you, this pink producer surplus. And in order to do that, what we're going to do is to take the price in the market, 500. Oh, I need one more price. I started to do the math and I couldn't. We also need to know where the supply curve originates because that essentially is the cost to the most efficient producer. So I'm going to go ahead and put this in at 100. There, that works a little bit better. Okay, so now I can take a look at exactly, what is the measurement of this line segment right here from P1 to A. And from P1 to A, what we have is 500 minus 100, which equals 400. Whoops, 400. Stop it. Okay, so that essentially gives us one line segment. I also want to measure the line segment from 0 to Q1. So in this scenario, from 0 to Q1, we take 100 minus 0, and as we know, that is equal to 100. So to calculate the area of this triangle right here, we're going to take 1/2 of the base. I'll just use 100. So 1/2, whoops, 1/2 of 100 times 400. And so in this example, 1/2 of 100 is 50 times 400, which equals 2,000. So producer surplus in pane 1 is, or in pane A, excuse me, is 2,000. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and clear that. Now that we know that pane A is 2,000, that's exactly what this lighter triangle is over here, using those same numbers. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and put the numbers, if I can remember them. I think it was 500, wasn't it? Yeah, I think so. And down here, I think I had 100. And Q1, I think I had 100. Okay. Yeah. And then let's say the price rises. Okay. So the price is going to increase. Whoops. That's a stamp. Okay. That's weird. Sorry. I'm having my own little internal dialogues here. The Oompa Loompas are really quiet these days because I have so many thoughts. Okay, so let's say the price increases to, I don't know, 700. Sounds good. Okay, so the price increases to 700. So our P2 is 700. P1 is 500. Point A here is 100. And now let's go ahead and give us a Q2. Because the price increased, we know that supply is going to increase, all else held constant. And I'll say that's 300. I don't know, for kicks and giggles. Okay, so We've already calculated this initial producer surplus, and remember that initial producer surplus was equal to 2,000. Okay, so that remains the same. But as the price increased, we have those initial producers, those people that were producing it at a price of 500, they're now getting $700 for that. And so we can say that they end up with, let's see if I can move that, there we go, additional producer surplus to initial producers. So let's take a look at exactly how we would calculate that particular area, and kind of the rosy pink. I'll call it 1 because we're using so many letters here. Okay, so how do we calculate the additional producer surplus to initial producers? Basically what we're going to do, I'm going to take it over here if you don't mind. We are going to use the area of a triangle. The area of a rectangle. So basically I have 700 minus 500 times the width of 100. And if you didn't see where I got the width from, okay, so here's my 700 minus my 500, and then times, and then 100, because this is 100 here. And I'm looking for the box, the width or area of box 1. So when I do that, I end up with 200 times 100. And that's going to equal 2,000. So we have another 2,000. Okay, so 2,000 is the additional producer surplus to initial producers. We would say the sum of initial producers is 4,000. And that's just the idea of 2,000 plus 2,000. Cool? All right. I know I'm so used to saying, does this make sense? But there's no one but the dog to tell me if it makes sense. And she's kind of, nothing quite makes sense to my dog. Okay. All right. So let me go ahead and clear that. The other thing that you'll be asked to calculate is going to be this, hey, how much of the, since the price increase, how many producers came into the market, and then what is their producer surplus? So that's pretty easy. Again, kind of looking at the numbers that I used before. Let me go ahead and put those back in. Sorry, 700, 500, 100, and 300. Okay, so now what I want to do is to calculate the area of this dark pink triangle. And again, kind of using the format that we have looked at before. So that same formula. So I'm going to go ahead and do that right here. And I'm going to say, okay, I need a base. So that would be 700 minus 500. It's going to give me my base of 200. Okay, half of that base times 200 equals 100. Hoping you all are checking my math too. And then I need to multiply that 100 by the height. So in this case, the height actually will be 300 minus 100. Okay, 300 minus 100. And so my 100 times 100 minus 300, which equals 200. So we end up with 100 times 200, which also equals 2,000. Whoops, not 20,000, 2,000. So the producer surplus to new producers would be 2,000. Okay, now hopefully that makes sense. If it doesn't, please, please, please view the video walkthroughs. Please also view the guided, I'm sorry, that's wrong, the workout, and that would be awesome. The graph builders. If you have any questions, as always, don't hesitate to contact me. I'm going to go ahead and clear all drawings, and I'm going to stop sharing that. Stop it. There we go. Okay, so we're getting through. I'm learning Zoom, and hopefully we can keep the technology moving as well. So Thanks, and I hope you guys are doing well. Take care.